I am going to use my notes. It just helps me get started. So people don't change when times are good.
It's the chord.
It's the
I don't know
chord.
why that does that. I think the
I wonder if I'm loud enough. How am I loud enough without the speaker?
Yes, really are.
Oh, because I'm not a speaker familiar sort of a person. Yeah, people don't change when times are good. We're living in a time of great upheaval, and certainly this is a time of great danger. But it's also an absolutely perfect, great opportunity for us to shift the balance towards something that is more regenerative, more healing on this earth. The challenge for those of us who are working on it is staying engaged, even when things get rough, when we're not feeling successful at all the work that we have to do and all the times that we put in all the work and we didn't succeed. Of remembering that we have power when we work together, when we reject the forces that divide us or try to convince us that the task is hopeless. This work has never been more important. And every group that's represented here through Alliance for Action, you've all helped to push us toward that enduring good. I'd like to start this main presentation, Carbon Fee and Dividend, with a little slide PowerPoint that I put together. Here it is. We haven't tested this out yet, so we'll see how it goes. A little PowerPoint that I put together of the work that the Climate Focus Group did in 2017. It's a kind of interesting thing, I think, for you all, because we're part of Alliance for Action, so some of the actions that we took were Alliance for Actions, and you may recognize yourself in a couple of these, but of course it's the climate group, so we've got our own particular spin on it. But Stephen Hawking died on Wednesday, so in honor of his memory, I'd like to begin with some of his words. One of the great revelations of space travel has been the perspective it has given us of ourselves. When we see the Earth from space, we see ourselves as a whole. We see the unity, not the divisions. It's such a simple image with a compelling message. We are here together, one planet, one human race. We are here together and we need to live together with tolerance and respect. We are all time travelers, journeying into the future, but let us work together to make that future a place we want to visit. Be brave, be determined, overcome the odds. It can be done. All right, everybody crush your fingers. Okay. Oh. That was too much to ask. Then everybody just be patient for a minute. Oh, yay. Oh, well, no wonder. Shoot, I thought that was the slide up behind me. That was the slide that was meant to be up behind me. So here we go. I think we're ready. Okay, let's try it again. Oh, come on, do this for me, baby.
If you tell me what
There we go. There we go.
Oh, I know.
March,
Nice.
huh? Oh, shoot. No, we're starting over again. I claim presenter's prerogative. Why isn't that? One more chord. Okay, because the music matters. All right, so that's good. All right, now we're ready to start. And on current slide.
I am the desert dry. I We are children growing. You are the place we live. We are the seeds you're sowing. We are the life you give. We are the future rising. We will be your voice. We will watch and learn from you. We will make the truth. I am the river, we are your children. I am the desert, you are the place we. I am your winds, we are the seeds. I am the sunsets, we are the breathing. We will be your voice. I am the storm that's gathering. We will make the truth.
Oh, it knocks my socks off, especially those last two slides. I can't do it. Okay, so now I'm gonna pull up a different program, which I think right underneath it. Any luck? That's not it. Oh, good. Okay. Yes, now, I wonder if this is, I just can't understand why this isn't working.
Want the light?
I don't know, but can you hit this right here?
Yes,
every
when you
time
tell
I
me.
start to do it?
Okay.
That's odd, I just don't.
Enter,
that
right?
always works. Yeah, just every
Okay.
time
Do that.
Okay. Okay, every morning I wake torn between a desire to save the world and an inclination to savor it. This makes it hard to plan the day. But if you forget to savor the world, what possible reason do we have for saving it? In a way, the savoring must come first. I find myself here, you know, I've been on Medicare for 2 years. A lot more of my life is lived before now than I have out in front of me. And I look back with just enormous gratitude for the opportunities and the experiences I've had. I've been lucky enough to hike in the Himalayas, in the Andes, in the Rockies. I've been in the Amazon jungle hiking. I mean, I have been in indigenous communities in every continent except Africa. I know firsthand what we're losing and the suffering that's going to accompany it. So, next slide.
Oh, wrong way.
After spending my life working with children, this little girl's plea grabs my soul. I have to be here. I have to do whatever I can do to save some for her. Next slide. and I'll quit being emotional. That just is, I never had to give the presentation right after doing that first thing I did. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. Science is usually a process of finding some little discrete corner, some small enough problem that you can get rid of most of the variables and researching that, and then everybody compiling all the various bits and pieces and looking for the bigger whole. But in the 90s, maybe a little bit in the 80s, there was a big interest in looking at the systems and looking at the complex interrelationships between things. Will Steffen and others set back to look at these socioeconomic trends and Earth system trends, and they discovered something really unexpected. One thing you'll see here is that in all of these graphs, there is a kind of a more steady state sort of a growth. It's a linear growth progression, we call it, and then it goes exponential, and you may not be able to see it here, but there's a line right there. This was right after World War II. We started living on this planet in a way that we hadn't done before, and of course babies started surviving. And so now we've got 7 million people living on this earth together, and it's a problem. We need to change the way we live here. But I want to call your attention to one interesting thing. Stratospheric ozone. You can see that, now, you might notice that this one, but this is marine fish capture, and there's other reasons for that stopping and declining. Stratospheric ozone, though, is instructive. In the 70s, so Reagan's president, there's a lot of concern among scientists that we have put too much ozone into our atmosphere and it's creating big problems. Fortunately, Margaret Thatcher, who was a chemist by training, was in Europe. In England, we had a pretty good working relationship, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. She convinced him that this would be good legislation. So we put in, the U.S. government put in legislation to limit and reduce ozone in all the things we use it for, from hairspray to air conditioners. The world did not end. I'm here to tell you, we figured out other things that we could do to replace it. The economy did not collapse, but look what it did. There's a little peak right there when it was first implemented, and no, it didn't go down here, but we're not the only people in the world, right? So I know Mexico is still using some of the old air conditioners that we got rid of. So, but it's still a good testament to what we can do with legislation. Next slide. Okay, the other thing we know is that in the 1800s, there's actually a lot of support for the idea that the Earth was relatively cool, okay? That's not the case. Ever since about 1976 was the last year the Earth was cooler than the 20th century average. One thing to point out here is that usually an El Nino year put the global temperatures way high compared to the years before and after. But take a look at the 2015 El Nino year. For one thing, compare them. For another thing, notice that 2016 and 2017, which is not on that graph, are hotter than the last big El Nino year. This is kind of running away from us. Next slide. We know where that heat is going. The vast majority of it, over 93% of it, is being absorbed by the oceans. Next slide. And we also know that it's not evenly distributed in the ocean. What happens is sea surface temperatures rise quicker. They get enfolded, and that's causing some other problems. But this is what is called a sea surface temperature anomaly. And I want to explain that word to you. It's really hard to compare temperatures in, say, Phoenix and Fairbanks, okay? You can't compare them. So what scientists do is they call it an anomaly. They look at, right now what they're looking at is the 20th century average for Phoenix. And then the anomaly is, how is Phoenix different from their own 20th century average? Are they warmer by 2 degrees, cooler by 2 degrees? Now you can do the same thing for Fairbanks. You can compare it to its own average. Now you can look at that anomaly and actually work with that data. So this is the anomaly for sea surface temperature. The white is absolute dead average for 20th century. And you get up here into the reds and browns and you're way above. And you can see that Yucatan Peninsula is right here. There's Florida, the Gulf Coast. You can see that there was average temperature water here in Yucatan. It really kind of looks like maybe winds or something had blown, maybe wave action, had blown a lot of this really warm water up against the shore. You see a real big band of it there. And right here along the Texas Gulf Coast, well, this is August 23rd. August 24th was Hurricane Harvey. Next slide. Oh, no, go back. Sorry. You don't know how to go back.
No.
Wrong way. Okay. We can do exactly this kind of anomaly picture for every one of the 2017 hurricanes. 100 lives, over 100 lives lost. It's going to cost us over $250 billion. And remember, it's us that pays for it. If it's FEMA, it's the dollars you pay in tax. If it's your insurance company, you're going to pay higher premiums to cover it. If it's yourself or your cousin or your uncle, you know, you may have helped contribute to their mucking out, or, you know, and then I know we've all made donations to the hurricane victims. We pay for this. I can do the same thing with Superstorm Sandy in 2012. There was, again, that really anomalously warm sea surface temperature right up against the coast. Hurricane Sandy was, in fact, the trajectory was that it was going to go back out into the ocean, into the Atlantic. And what it did instead was it hit that high heat water, and it did an abrupt left turn and slammed into New Jersey. That was a pretty expensive one for them. Super Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines. Now that was a little bit longer ago, but 63,000 lives were lost. Haiyan was the biggest typhoon, their hurricane, ever recorded in the Pacific. It went across a section of the equator that was superheated. As a storm goes over warm water, it picks up energy. It picks up just intensity. There were 235-mile-an-hour winds recorded in Haiyan. The cost is only $4.5 billion, but you know, the Philippines isn't quite the pricey real estate that we have in some of these other areas. Now we can go to the next slide. Just like sea surface temperatures, you know, just like the ocean isn't heating evenly everywhere, when you have warm air temperatures, as the air warms, it can hold more water vapor. And it's not all uniformly distributed. We get what are called these atmospheric rivers, and this is something well worth paying attention to. We're seeing more of these with deeper consequences. Remember, for the last about 5, 6, 7 years, California was in that super major drought. They were all hurting. The reservoirs were drying. But in February, suddenly they had so much rain, there was worried that a dam would break. Or certainly that it would overtop. What happens in these atmospheric rivers is the conditions get right to create a rainstorm, and they're called bathtub drain storms. Just like when you pull the plug in a bathtub, it just doesn't take what's right over the drain. It empties the whole tub, and that's kind of what we were seeing, because once the conditions for rain start, it pulls it in from that river and dumps it. Next slide. We are seeing this all over, not just, you know, in a few isolated places. Arizona's had a bunch of these. I've lived in my house in Rio Rico, and my neighborhood is bordered on 2 sides by big washes. I've never seen water even flow across the street in 20 years. And 2 years ago, I couldn't get out of my neighborhood because the water was this high in both washes. There had been one of those extreme weather events just to the west of me, next to me. The other thing that we need to kind of keep in mind is that the concern is that it's not, the heating isn't equal all over the globe either. It is concentrating in the poles. This one, I did a presentation for the Green Valley Council last week, so I pulled this one off as a screenshot on Monday of last week, and you can see, okay, here's our chart again. This is an anomaly chart, and so the deeper red-brown you get here, this is 10 degrees centigrade higher when you get into this sort of a color. We have had in 2016, 2017, and 2018, we have had week-long periods where it was 50 degrees above normal in the Arctic. Of course, there are some consequences to this. It is melting, of course, the polar ice caps. We've all seen pictures of the glaciers melting. A big concern is that it is melting sea ice over the Arctic Ocean, and that has big changes to our weather. Things like it's caused it's called a circumpolar vortex. It's like the jet stream, okay? And it has gone unstable. And that's why we get these big, you can see this is coming out of the tropics. This big section of warm, moist air going up into the Arctic, and that's pushing down cold air into the into the East Coast. This was that big cold snap we had last week. Remember that? It was unusually cold here. But it's because of this unstable nature. And I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to show you. This next is a little video clip. Go ahead. I'm going to, I can't, it worked fine at home. Never mind. I'm going to describe it for you. This is just a piece of the Siberian tundra. Right, tundra is mostly permafrost, a little bit of grass on the top, and then underneath it's really frozen. But in this area right here, it looks like a waterbed. The guy came out in the clip, he comes out and he steps on it, and it's just like stepping on a waterbed. The whole thing is really mushy, and then he starts digging his heel in, and you think, oh, there's going to be water come out of there because the permafrost is thawing. It isn't water, it's methane. When he finally gets his heel in there, it's gas coming out, not water. Methane comes out of the tundra in two different ways. One is everywhere in the tundra, as it thaws, that is all peat. And it's decomposing, and decomposition creates methane. So there's a lot of methane coming there. But the real worrisome piece of this is that there are methane hydrates. They're crystallized methane. It's methane and ice, basically. But they're in a solid form, and they're capped and kept under both the tundra up there and on the continental shelves. There's a lot of methane locked in storage by ice. It's now starting to come out. In 2013, when I first saw that video, which I thought, oh, it would have been nice if he'd thrown a match down there so you could see it light. He knew about this, apparently. This is an unusually big one, but in 2013, reindeer herders across that whole Arctic Circle area started coming back and going, there's holes showing up in the ground out there. We do not understand what's going on. This is new. Methane, permafrost has warmed an average of 11 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 30 years. This is a concern to us. Next slide. It is not a concern to everybody. There are certain people who would very much like to see this continue. And there is a financial incentive. 90 billion barrels estimated of undiscovered oil in this Arctic Circle area. Russia owns a lot of it, and they have militarized a bunch of communities in this area. They have staked their flag right underneath the last vestiges of the sea ice at the North Pole. They have laid claim for some of the undersea ridges. And obviously, it's not just the oil, but this whole open to shipping has some financial reward. So as you listen to the news, that's something to keep in mind. Follow the money. Next slide. Okay, what we know about the warming, but the CO2 concentration is why it's warming. I was thinking about this the other day. Coal is carbon, right? It's pretty much carbon. And it's black, and if you rub it with your fingers are going to get black. If you burn it to turn it into CO2, you've still got that little carbon, and now you've added 2 oxygen molecules so it floats, but it's still coal up there, okay? It's still solid, it's still carbon up there. It's just been mixed with oxygen. So it's not hard to imagine that it's creating this blanket that's holding the heat into Earth's atmosphere. We need a certain amount of blanket, but we've got something that's way too much.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, no worries. The only thing you missed on that is that showed us up at about 393 parts per million, which is way above the 20th century average. In 2013, we hit 400 parts per million, and it's still going up. This carbon pollution is the source of the problem. Oh, carbon and methane too, but we can work on carbon a little easier. So there are some impacts in Arizona from carbon pollution. Drought and fire. Arizona has always had droughts. With global warming because of, well, it has just increased our chances of drought, and our chance of a mega drought, 50 years or more, is now very big. I know y'all were working to protect our water supplies. And when you get drought, you get fire. They just go together. Excessive heat waves. We'll see some of those. Phoenix had one last year that was pretty bad. But temperatures in Iran have been 129 degrees. The Middle East is likely to become uninhabitable. And then flooding we've talked about. Next slide. So we know how to solve this. If we want less of it, we make it more expensive. And then I'm going to pause here for just a minute, because the next slide I'm going to tell you about carbon fee and dividend, the plan. But I've kind of learned as I've done this presentation that it might be good for us to just stop and think for a minute about what it is we've got to do and what it's going to take in order to do it. This might be different than the plan you had imagined to solve global warming. So if you could just kind of hang with me on the fact that this might be different than yours. But the big thing is to think a little bit about how humans deal with change. Managers, I pulled this off the internet, managers often make the mistake of assuming that once a change is started, their employees will see that it is going to take place and they'll get on board. I can tell you from a teacher's perspective, if you walk into a classroom full of 35 kids and you announce something that is profoundly different, it might be way better. But if it's profoundly different, you are going to have people object. And there are stages that people go through in this change process that are much like the grief process. So change causes fear, a sense of loss of the familiar. It takes time for people to understand the meaning of change and to commit to change in a meaningful way. So the stages are, first one is denial, that they need to do it, that they're gonna do it. And the next one is anger and resistance. I don't know if you know anybody that rides a motorcycle, but I remember when the motorcycle helmet law first came out, there were a whole lot of people. It's not really my crowd, but if you know anybody, there was a lot of resistance to it, and it wasn't pretty resistance. Then kind of comes around, the next stage is exploration and acceptance. You start trying it out, you start figuring, well, this part works, I don't like this part, but I can live with this part. And then finally you make a commitment to the purpose for the change. If you've ever been forced to make a change you didn't want to make, or perhaps you didn't even see the need for, you have to understand that the only way we are going to bring the whole United States along is to take baby steps. Give people plenty of choice to be able to try this out, skip this part for now, maybe later, try this part out. We've got to help them, because when we make this more expensive, everybody's costs are going to go up. So the plan that's going to work has got to help people with that. And it's got to be something that gradually builds rather than slamming people with a really dramatic shift right at the beginning. I just want to give you some statistics about where we are. Now, this was from 2016, but there's a group called the Yale Climate Communications Group, and they really study attitudes and perception about how people think about climate change, and these were kind of interesting. Republicans, 50% of them think that climate change is happening, but only 31% of them think it's caused by man. They think it's caused by natural earth processes. 82% of Democrats, so we don't even have all Democrats, and 65% of Democrats think that it's man-caused. That means 35% of them still think that it's natural processes. So we don't have everybody on board with us just for the purpose of the reasoning for this. Only 32% of Republicans are even worried about climate change. Democrats came in at 73%. And here's the interesting one, though. So I've given you all these one-third sort of numbers. 57% of Republicans are willing to regulate carbon pollution. So regulating carbon pollution it's got some potential. Okay, so here's the plan. And this is the best first step. Once we take back all 3 levels, branches of government, oh my God. But it's wonderful to talk to a sympathetic crowd. Okay, so the first step is we place a fee on fossil fuels at the source, at the mine, at the wellhead. If it's being ported in from the Middle East, we put it at the port. That's the simplest thing. Then it goes out and gets used. However it gets used, we've already got the fee attached to it. There's not that many companies that we have to deal with in order to collect it doing it this way either. The second thing is that gets pulled back in, it gets collected by the government, and it's just redistributed by the government. I forgot to say one thing earlier when I was preparing you. I'm paused, okay? One of the things, there's a very human thing that we see something and we think, oh, that can never work, and we don't know why, right? And so we try to think about some reasons why it wouldn't work, and here's what I hear. In the presentations that I've given, it'll never work administratively. I'm sorry, but every time I hear that, I think this is somebody who has decided, that just has a gut reason, but that thinks it can't work. The administrative piece of it will work. It's been studied extensively. It's been done other places. It's already being done in Alaska to a certain extent for a different purpose, but the administrative piece will work. So returning all the revenue to the households equally means that it gets collected by the IRS. It's just another line item for the companies. It gets distributed by Social Security. Social Security is very good at doing that. The estimate is that initially it'll probably take 8% of the entire amount collected, but over time that will decrease until towards the last half, it's only at 2%. So the vast majority of this goes back to households equally, and that's the piece that means that low-income people, low-income households are protected from the rising costs of carbon as the fee gets moved through the economy. So, and then of course, we need to keep a level playing fields for our manufacturers. If we're manufacturing something or exporting any kind of a product, agricultural even, if we're sending it, exporting it to a country that does not already have a price on carbon, some sort of a fee, then at the border, the fee gets pulled off so that that company can sell to India, is a good example, can sell to India without having that extra fee tacked on. But same thing happens. If India tries to sell their products to us, they can produce it more cheaply because it's they don't have the fee on carbon. So we tack a fee on carbon at the border. It just levels the playing field. The group that came up with this is a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby is just that. It's a lobby. Their whole focus is to motivate, to encourage, to support, to grow political will to deal with the climate crisis. They're a pretty fabulous group. Next slide. They're international. They're not in every country, but there are a lot of the major ones, including some kind of big polluters. US, Canada, Australia, we're pretty big polluters. So those are important groups to have in there. India is pretty important because it doesn't already have a fee on carbon. It's nonpartisan. We build relationships with everyone, even those who oppose us. The advantage of that, of course, is that people can change their minds. But if you've pissed them off, they're bloody well not going to change in your favor. So building that political goodwill is a powerful thing. It's nonprofit, it's solution focused. If there's another, and I've seen this just since I've been part of it, if another solution comes out, they support it. Even if it is not quite carbon fee and dividend, if it looks like it could work in that situation. So we are for whatever works, but especially, of course, carbon fee and dividend. And then, of course, and especially, you all know, especially in this time when people are just like being rude to each other, it's almost accepted anymore. We treat everyone, even those who oppose us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. Even those who are on the opposite side of the fence on this don't mind when CCL lobbyists, us, David and Mary are going to go to the national conference this summer in Washington, D.C., and we'll have a chance to go get to do some political lobbying. So we're pretty excited about that. But we know that even the ones who oppose us are going to not mind when CCL volunteers come in to tell them about it. Next slide. Okay, so who's on the advisory board of CCL kind of matters. James Hansen was, yeah.
It's okay. She wants to ask a question.
Oh, sure.
No, basically the question, Connie, is I have a question 2 slides before. Can we address that at the end?
I'll tell you what, let me get through the whole thing. We're pretty close to the end, and then I will leave some time for questions. Jot it down or something. I'd never remember by the end. But I know that we can get off into the weeds here, and I won't finish, and that would be terrible. Okay, so James Hansen was a climate scientist that spoke to Congress in 1988 and told them we have a problem with the climate. His attitude is the backbone of a solution to the climate problem is a flat carbon emissions price. We need to put a price on carbon. But he also says the carbon price must rise continually at a rate that is economically sound. The funds must be distributed back to the citizens, not to special interests. Carbon fee and dividend starts the rate at $15 per ton, and every year it's $10 are added to it. So every year the amount collected from the companies, the fossil fuel companies, goes significantly up. The good piece about that is it allows utility companies, for instance, to say solar array, coal plant, this is getting cheaper, this is escalating every time I breathe, it's a little more expensive. And so they can make some investment decisions that are good for us in the long run that also make sense to their shareholders. Next slide. And remember, this is a bipartisan group. So on the Republican side, on the conservative side, is George Shultz, Treasury Secretary and Secretary of State under Reagan. He published a big paper a year ago for Republicans, for conservatives, that was basically carbon fee and dividend with very minor changes. We are working together on this. But the Republicans say it has to be revenue neutral. If you're taking that money in, you've got to pass it back out to consumers. We do not want it to grow government. We do not want to finance some other government program. So we can work with that. We can work with that. Next slide. So you've got the basic plan and who has pretty much put it together. But the question that you might have is, how do we know this is going to work? And that's a very legitimate question. So a national and regional study from the it's called the REMI study, stands for Regional Economic Modeling Incorporated. I looked it up to see who they were. They provide analysis to both governmental bodies and fossil fuel corporations. They're highly respected, so this was a good study. And basically, they studied 4 different areas. Emissions, is it really going to reduce them? The economy, what's going to happen to jobs? What's going to happen to GDP? Are there health benefits? And what about people's incomes? What's going to happen there? In a nutshell, there's no economic reason not to do this. Next slide. So I'm just going to talk about these 4. Under carbon fee and dividend, within 10 years, it's 31% below the 1990 levels in the U.S. Within 20 years, we have dropped to 50%. Now, if you can imagine perhaps adding, when the political climate is right, some other things that help, we could even be closer to I don't know that we'll ever get to zero carbon, but we start really making some significant changes. But 50% below the 1990 levels is very healthy. Next slide. Under carbon fee and dividend, it actually grows the number of jobs. We know that people who get a little extra money from their taxes, it's not a huge amount, you know, not certainly enough to necessarily invest, but it allows you to go out to dinner, to maybe, I don't know, buy something extra, goes to have a nice experience with your kids. This is all lends to this 2 million new jobs. A lot of these are in the service industry, retail benefits, health care workers benefit from this. Also, real estate. I'm not quite sure how that relates. They benefit from everything. I don't know, except not when the economy melts. By the end of 20 years, we're up to almost 3 million new jobs. So it's not the be-all and end-all. It's not going to save the economy if something else goes wrong. But it is certainly a positive thing that means that this is not the reason to reject it. Next slide. I just threw this in for interest. The labor share of the economy has been steadily dropping. Now, I'm not trying to trick you. These aren't huge numbers over here. It goes from 74.6 to 76.2. You should always look at that scale when somebody gives you a graph about something. But even so, you can see that the prediction is that 2015 we're here. By 2035, labor will have a smaller and smaller share, but carbon fee and dividend actually levels that off. Next slide. Under carbon fee and dividend, average GDP growth is $70 to $85 billion a year, and over 20 years, it's $1.4 trillion of new money added to the economy. Not bad. Next slide. Household dividend. Now, these are, don't take these, kind of a little bit grain of salt. The REMI study was done based on a $10 per ton starting fee. And we're starting at $15 per ton. So these aren't precise, but they're pretty darn close. This is for a family of 4. Kids under 18, up to 2 per family, are given a half credit. So a family of 4 would have 2 adults, 2 kids, for a total of 3 shares. Okay, you can see these aren't huge, but your gas is going to go up probably 13 cents a gallon. That means that food that's got transportation costs associated with it, anything that's shipped is going to go up, a little bit. You will have enough, 80% of people end up having enough out of that monthly dividend, and CCL's proposal is a monthly check, to cover the new costs that you have for carbon, putting a price on carbon. The lower you are in the income scale, the less carbon pollution you probably actually are responsible for. But and so you have more left over at the end of the month that is disposable income. You didn't have to pay for it. The higher you are in the income brackets, you probably have a bigger house, you probably fly more, you probably buy more stuff, and all of those things create carbon pollution. Your costs, you may not completely recover it, but $15, $20 or whatever it is, especially to begin with, isn't going to break anybody in that category. So we're going from close to $300 a month to $400 a month over a period of 10 years. It starts at like about $50 a month, and then the next $50 a month, and then the next year it's like about $96 a month. It just goes up like that. So that's what we're looking at. Next slide. And of course, we know that those people who are living downwind of some of these coal-fired power plants or whatever factories are dying from it. The expectation is 227,000 lives over 20 years. And okay, next slide. I think there's just 2 left. Oh, no, I got to tell you this. This is cool. You guys will appreciate this. Okay, House Climate Solutions Caucus. There is in the House of Representatives, it's called the Noah's Ark Caucus because it has to come 2 by 2. You can only get another Democrat in there if you get another Republican in there. In the beginning of this administration, so January 2017, there were 12. This from a news article from March 17th last year, 2017, was that it had gone to 28 in just those 2 months. Next slide. By July, it had already gone to 50. So there was a lot of building interest. Next slide. Pulled this off last month, February 7th. We are now up to 70 members. Wow. So there is growing political will to do something about this. Next slide. Okay, so last 2 slides. So what can you do? Well, talk with others. Climate change is a thing, it just doesn't get talked about. One of the ways that I suggest you do it is start, if you're not using reusable bags for your shopping, for God's sake, why not? When you take your reusable bag into the grocery store, is an absolutely wonderful opportunity for you to stand in line and talk about the fact that you've got your reusable bags and where you got them from, and I really like, and I always mention it to the cashier. I always say something, well, did you have very many people with their own bags in today? I have been doing my own reusable bags, and I will be the first to say it is not an easy habit to acquire. It took me 6 months of really wanting to do it, and it was always the bags were always someplace else. One time I was even so frustrated, I just said, let's just put the groceries in the cart and I'll take them out to the bags that are in the car out there. And that actually was a pretty good lesson. But so talk with others, find opportunities to say something about it to other people. I go into Home Depot and I say, I'm doing this because it's better for your world. I'll be dead, but it's better for your world. Reduce your own carbon footprint. The 2 big ones are the temperature at which you keep your house and how much all the transportation we do, car, plane, all that. Those are the 2 big ones. Exercise your political power. I know you all are already doing this. Encourage others to do the same, and I'm going to give you an idea. There you go, next one. Okay, and we're asking that you join Citizens Climate Lobby. You don't have to do anything, it doesn't cost anything, but this is designed to build political will. The more people who have become members of Citizens Climate Lobby, the more they can walk up to the representative, to Jeff Flake or whoever's going to take his place and go, look, especially from Tucson south or wherever, in Arizona, we have tremendous support for doing something about carbon and for doing it under Citizens Climate Lobby plan. There are tens of thousands of volunteers now, hundreds of chapters. We're writing op-eds, we're writing letters to the editor. Gloria Thiel had a letter to the editor in the Green Valley News just, Tuesday? Just early. Yeah, just very, very recently. Okay, I've got other slides in here, but they're not part of the program. It's just if I have to defend myself. Okay. So let's start with you, Ursula.
Well, Connie,
Yeah.
It was the slide where you explained 1, 2, 3, 4, perhaps it was 5, what the cost would be.
What the
cost with relative carbon fee and dividends. I was surprised to hear that everyone would be bearing the cost. I would have thought the CCL would be very concerned with climate justice. Is that not true?
Okay, thank you for asking that question, because I didn't explain it very well then. Everybody pays more cost. That's just the way it is. Everybody is going to pay the higher prices. But the way carbon fee and dividend works is you get some money. We're going to give you some money to pay it. And those who are at the bottom of the economic scale end up being the ones that have money left over. They have smaller houses, they have smaller carbon footprints in general, so they're not even going to use all of that dividend that comes back into their household. They're the ones that in fact end up growing the economy because they've now got a little bit of extra money to spend. Those at the top will get the same amount, but their carbon footprint is enormous compared to low incomes. So yes, we're very concerned about low income people. We give them the money to pay the increased cost.
So CCL is almost equating climate justice.
Yes, absolutely. It's built into the program. It is something that cannot be ignored. Yeah. Anybody else have a question?
Maybe this is obvious, but because it takes a while to think this through, is that, well, how does it reduce carbon? Because it's the market forces, because when the price of carbon goes up, manufacturers are going to say, how can we produce whatever we're making using less carbon? Maybe we'll put solar panels on our factory, and that's a simple example, but, and the same, you mentioned the different power companies. It'll be real clear that renewable sources are going to cost much less, especially as the price of carbon goes up. So the idea is the price of carbon is going to keep going up, which is going to incentivize everybody, business and individuals, to use less carbon. It'll be clearer that you don't want a gas guzzler car as the prices go up more, for us. But for companies, and I think I read that you talked about we pay for heat in our house, we pay for when we fly, transportation, but 2/3 of the carbon is not in stuff we can really control. It's not, we can't just decide we're going to individually buy our way out of this, because it's things we don't have control over. So maybe it's how the schools are heated in our community, or something like that. So it will incentivize government, business, and individuals to use less carbon.
Good point. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
So I'll do my usual role of wet blanket, but wouldn't the corporations or manufacturers just raise their prices?
Yes, they're going to. They're absolutely going to pass this increased cost This is how come it works.
But why
They're
is it-
gonna turn around and pass the cost on to the consumer. That's why that money goes back to you to pay it.
Okay, and then my other wet blanket is, I don't trust these guys at all to do this kind of stuff. Trust the government who is, supposedly taking it in, and then it's gonna just pass it on to us. I don't believe a word of it.
That's the advantage of bipartisan, right? If you have something that, let's just do a hypothetical. If the Democrats put something in place that the Republicans hate, they will tear it apart. If the Democrats put something in place that the Republicans agree with, they're much more likely to say, and remember, 57% of Republicans accept the fact that we need a price on carbon. One of the, I didn't do this with you, but the story that I told when I talked to Republicans last week was I talked about water pollution. When I was a little girl, we lived in Washington, D.C. for a little while, and I can still remember, I was 4 years old, and I can still remember my dad took me down to the Potomac River, going past the Capitol. It was horrid. It was a cesspool. So in 1968, when Nixon signed the Clean Water Act and cleaned up our waters, that was Republican. They were supportive of us. They were supportive of this. So as long as we can keep support on both sides of the aisle here, then I don't think they'll take it apart. I think we, this will work. Yeah.
What we'll do as consumers is we'll choose things that use less carbon. For example, very few of you will be driving the same car 30 years from now. And so the cars 30 years from now will be designed with less carbon. And you will buy the car that has the 70 miles per gallon, not the one that has 6 miles per gallon. And so the consumers will drive the production of lower cost, more efficient items. And so it's market driven.
Yeah, thank you.
So has there been any pushback against this right now? I mean, from businessmen or from lobby?
Well, I just heard something positive. Now, I think part of the movement is educating the citizens and our elected officials about the plan. It's not a bill yet for anybody to vote on.
Right.
But I don't know how many schools, but it was several. I have to go back and read more carefully. The young Republicans in some major universities just endorsed this. Now, Republicans don't endorse climate plans. So that is, they're the future. They're recognizing the problem, and it fit with, let the market decide philosophy. So,
Okay, so there
There's
hasn't
that, but-
been any group kind of pushing back against this or writing little articles to, that's great.
Not that I'm aware
Great,
of.
though.
Yeah,
I mean,
not
it's
that I'm aware of. And CCO puts out. Oh, I got a handout that's folded.
something else, Cece,
It's meant to be a
I did go
people
to their Southwest conference a couple of months ago of Citizens Climate Lobby. And they're very astute, I would say, about how they discuss things. Connie talked about, if you make enemies with people, it's going to be harder to have them as allies. And they found out to be saying to somebody, you've been wrong about climate change, you've been wrong about climate change, you've been wrong, you've been wrong, you've been wrong. They found people can discuss the solution without ever really getting into the whole science of climate change and how they missed the boat and all. A little of that is happening in Arizona right today, this week, which is another story, but about the switch away from gas to solar and battery storage. But, we don't have to really convince everybody about the science. And part of the language is, Connie used it too, talking about carbon pollution. People know pollution is bad. Carbon pollution you don't see or smell, but we know it's destroying our air, our atmosphere. But just that difference in how you talk about it, they're very careful so that they can talk to people who aren't natural allies. So.
Yeah, and there is, if you go on their website, they have a fabulous website. David is a big fan of their website too.
Really?
It is one of the most incredibly well-researched websites I have ever seen on any topic. It's just a huge amount of stuff. And even more if you join Citizens Climate Lobby, become a member of the Tucson chapter, and then you can have access to the community website, which is all kinds of teaching materials, presentations, I mean, they just said, yeah. But there is this page on there called Who Supports Climate Action, which is a really interesting read. National security leaders, they've got a bunch of them. Energy industry, interestingly, ExxonMobil is a supporter of carbon fee and dividend. There was another one there, Royal Dutch Shell. A lot of them support, if not carbon fee and dividend, at least they're, specifically, at least they're already supporting a fee on carbon. It's pretty much recognized that we have a problem with carbon pollution. Faith leaders, business associates, conservative thought leaders, which include a lot of the people in media, public officials, newspaper editorials, healthcare leaders. There is a long list. California has put in a resolution calling for carbon fee and dividend already. The state has. In Arizona, the city of Flagstaff has done it. The city of Tucson has done it. The county of Pima has already put in a resolution endorsing carbon fee and dividend. There's a long list of towns and counties that have endorsed carbon fee and dividend. It solves at least the problems of getting something off the ground. Working in education, it's really hard to change something like education too. And my superintendent used to say, it's like driving this major cruise liner. And, you can't just turn the wheel 90 degrees and have the darn thing turn like this. What you've got to do is you've got to make a series of shifts and get it headed in order to get it headed in another direction. And that's what this is. This is a shift that brings it all to the household. We don't see where all the carbon pollution enters our lives. Thank you for bringing that up. It enters in all kinds of invisible places, but you're going to start seeing a price increase, and that will allow you to make better choices, more informed choices. Oh, the price of that's gone up. That must be the carbon component. How can I use less of it, find another source, get it where it's low carbon manufacture? It'll just involve all of us. Some of the other climate change solutions, and I was very much in support of President Obama's Paris Climate Accord. I was really glad to see that. But it did not involve the people in any way whatsoever. It was all about shutting down coal-fired power plants, and it left us completely out of the feel of the whole thing. I like this because it gets at the household level. I'll be around. I'll let you go. The thing that you just received was folded in another line. So if you want to fold it, the thing that I want to call your attention to is on the back. Citizens, just go on Google and just put Citizens Climate Lobby in, and it'll bring up their website. You can go there and sign up. They make it very easy. But find us online, Facebook. There's a website. Tucson has got a chapter, and you can join a live informational session every Wednesday at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. depending on daylight savings time, and they're really worthwhile. This is a group that's well organized, well prepared. And thank you. And I'll be around. If you had a burning question, we just didn't get to it. Just see me right afterwards.
I bet you there's some other people in the room who are part of the climate
Yeah, we
change.
could have a discussion.
Oh, yes.
I could tell you how it could work administratively. We have an example, if you want to stick around.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if
Raise your hand if you're part of our group, the climate group. Sally, get your hand.
you guys are doing a lot of work. Thank you.